Hello all. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for this joint press conference to be addressed by Indigenous Environmental Network, represented by Tamra, Gilbertson, IBON International, represented by Jax Bongon, and Biomass Action Network, represented by Amalya Octaviani from Trend Asia, and I am Souparna Lahiri from Global Forest Coalition. We are basically here to actually, when we ask ourselves what at stake in this COP, and we were trying to think of trying to unpack three issues that affects most of the communities and the work that we all do in terms of forest, biodiversity, indigenous communities, local communities, and those issues were mainly related to support, policy support, and finance for real climate actions, and of course alluding to the new collective quantity goal, how far that satisfies the kind of finance that we need for real climate actions, indicating the quality of finance and not only the quantum of finance. The second issue that we are really worried about is this hard push for carbon markets in this COP and within UNFCCC. And the third issue is that we have seen since Glasgow in the decision text of the COP mentions of fossil fuel phase out along with phase down of unabated coal. And we really want to unpack, when you say unabated coal, what is this unabated coal about? What is this difference between unabated coal and abated coal that suddenly becomes climate friendly? So we will really want to unpack, but not before expressing our serious concern and dismay the way the first day of the COP began yesterday, and how in pursuit of the carbon market and carbon market finance, both the presidency and the executive secretary of UNFCCC could facilitate undermining of their own process and governance bodies. The way the recommendations of the supervisory board of 6.4 has been pushed, gavelled through, bulldozed, undermines not only the parties of the COP, but the subsidiary body and the CMA itself. And we have here Ian Fry from Tuvalu. We actually really were happy that he had raised that issue, that this process cannot be, cannot be replicated anymore. And so here we are. I'm giving the podium to Jax for the dynamics that we may see, changing of dynamics with the pushing of carbon market via NCQG.
Okay. Thank you so much, Souparna. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, thank you for giving us a preview of what happened yesterday and how, what happened yesterday can affect, the dynamics of the new collective quantified goal, which is high on the agenda for this COP. So as we all know, COP29 is called the finance COP for a reason. It's because we are going to set the new collective quantified goal, or NCQG, in here. So this new goal represents an opportunity to address the widening gaps in the widening financial gaps felt deeply by communities in the Global South who contend with the growing impacts of climate change and have very scarce resources to address it. And I've just heard about the news recently that as we speak here, in the coming days, the Philippines will contend with 3 typhoons in a matter of 1 week. So it will slice through the Philippines just like that. So in terms of how things are shaping up or will shape up, I think recent news and developments have set the scene for what we are going to see with regards to how parties will be moving towards, adopting a new goal in the coming days. Just yesterday, the COP president, in his address to the parties, placed an overriding emphasis on bolstering private finance flows towards climate goals, and that, according to him, this could fill the gaps in public finance. And we are very cautious about this because according to the OECD, if we go back, private financing stagnated at about $14 billion per year from 2013 to 2020. And this is because the private sector is almost exclusively engaged in projects that guarantee economic returns, particularly those related to mitigation like renewable energy, energy efficiency, and waste management. It also often requires substantial public subsidies or de-risking mechanisms which divert already limited public funds from critical public needs. So ultimately, private capital interests are at odds with the Global South's climate needs, such as support for critical adaptation, addressing losses and damages, etc. And this does not fall far from the push to operationalize carbon markets under Article 6.4, which Souparna already mentioned, and I believe my colleagues here will expound on, which was taken note of in yesterday's plenary. This will open the door for more private finance flows for the new goal, and the possible adoption of markets could justify this. And we see this reliance on private finance. It signals an abdication by developed countries of their responsibility to provide adequate public finance. And with the recent outcomes of the US elections, for example, we are really on uncertain grounds. The incoming presidency of Trump has made pronouncements about pulling out of the Paris Agreement again, stepping back on climate. And as the country with the largest historical responsibility and with greater fiscal space, the US should be the leading contributor to the new goal, and their potential withdrawal could make it more challenging than it already is to demand them to pay up, and could undermine COP29's financial ambitions and further shift the burden of financing climate action onto developing countries. These developments tell us that parties are building a new goal far off from the demands of climate justice movements, civil society. We need a new climate finance goal that will respond to the urgent needs of the Global South to confront climate challenges. In practical terms, this means setting an NCQG that is in the trillions, not billions, commensurate with the climate debt owed by the Global North to the Global South. Funds should be new and additional, separate from existing financial flows like development aid, and structured as grants rather than loans to prevent increasing debt burdens of already vulnerable and poorer countries. And it should be fulfilled primarily through public financing, not private finance, facilitated through, for example, as I've mentioned, false solutions like carbon markets. We need specific targets as well for different priorities: mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. And we must uphold principles of equity, CBDRRC, and polluters pay, which places the responsibility of providing climate finance squarely onto developed countries or countries in the Global North. At the same time, climate finance must not be diverted towards propping up more false solutions, and instead, commitments towards the NCQG should be directly accessible to developing countries and frontline communities, empowering them to implement community-led, rights-based, and gender-just solutions to the climate crisis. We reckon that this will be a very tough fight for all of us in the coming days, but all hope is not lost. We need the collective resistance of movements, of civil society, especially in the coming days, in and out of the COP, to push back and to ensure that we are truly moving towards building a fair, equitable, ambitious climate finance goal. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jax. We are very clear that since 2009, the developed countries have failed to meet their obligations of even $100 billion a year. And now what they are trying to make us understand that carbon market finance is the only alternative. And let's be very clear that climate finance is not carbon market finance or vice versa. So more on carbon market, huge concern for us. It does not help any kind of climate action nor reducing emissions. So Tamra Gilbertson will now speak on Article 6 and the carbon market.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today to speak a little bit about carbon markets and also what's happening here, what's at stake, and what's still at stake in the coming weeks. There are a few of us here in this room that have followed carbon markets for over 20 years, looking at how they've impacted communities on the ground. And I want to be really clear that carbon markets are not some sort of theory or something in the air or some kind of an idea about trading molecules. Carbon markets have real and impactful material impacts on communities, especially indigenous peoples, and their lands. And that's why we're here to talk about this, not because we necessarily want to just argue, the markets or argue the finance, but because of the real impacts they have on the ground. And we've seen carbon markets that, over the last 20 years that have demonstrated failure after failure after failure, and that's exactly why. After greenhouse gases not being reduced from the CDM or other emissions trading systems underneath the Kyoto Protocol, we know that more carbon markets are not going to address the real causes of climate change, which are fossil fuel extraction. That it doesn't get to the heart or the root of the problem. Research has pointed out in the last years pointed out fraudulent carbon offset programs from the Operation Greenwash in Brazil, showing how so many of the offsets were fraudulent and not real, to embezzlement, to other real life violations on women in Africa to offset site. And so we've seen carbon markets fail to address the climate emergency, but not just that, really impact people's lives on the ground. And this is going to continue, and unfortunately with Article 6, this scales things up in a way that we've never seen with carbon markets in the past, because it becomes linked to NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, within Article 6.2. And Article 6.2 and those NDCs and the emissions trading systems are then linked to carbon offsets in Article 6.4. And within Article 6.4, of course, the private sector is invited to sort of put their offsets in there. And we know all of the problems that, as I've just pointed out, within the private sector. So what we know so far is that 20 years of carbon market failure is then rolled into NDCs and expanded on a global scale, and something that we've never seen before. I want to also make a couple points, and building off of Jax's points on finance. Carbon markets are very much seen as, and increasingly being talked about at this COP and previous COPs as a way to, pull finance out that can then be used as that much needed finance. But there's a few problems with that. One is that finance is not funding. And two is that what we're also talking about is not just finance, but financialization. I came back from the CBD COP, where there's a huge push for biodiversity offsets and credits and commodification of everything, financializing animals, sacred animals, financializing whales, trading whale offsets and whale credits, and trading, until all of nature becomes commodified and financialized. And that then, there's overlap, of course, with carbon markets. So we're very concerned about what that means for the future of the planet, where everything becomes financialized, and the actual real, the reason that we're in this problem to begin with, the root of the crisis, which is the extractive industries, are not addressed. Once these rules are in place, what incentives do they have for them to improve or change? What incentives are there then to shift away from carbon markets and financializations to addressing the real roots and causes of climate change? I want to say really quickly before I wrap up that there are still many things on the table. What happened yesterday was really about 2 documents, methodologies and removals within Article 6.4 that should have gone through a CMA process which would have been party-driven, a negotiation process which would have allowed for more discussion. That was sidelined because of the push to get carbon markets settled and up and moving as quickly as possible, which then lets all countries, especially countries in the global north, off the hook for actually having to put any finance. So instead of, any sort of climate debt repaid, what we see is more finance in the form of debt-causing finance on the global south. Like we've seen with Bretton Woods institutions for years, of course, loss and damage is underneath the World Bank, which we can only expect more types of debt-driven finance as well. But I want to end with saying a few things. There are still a lot of things in Article 6 that are on the table. In fact, the next room over in 25 is where they'll be negotiating 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8 the rest of the afternoon. And some of those issues are around linking of Article 6.2 and 6.4, which brings up issues around authorization. Who has the power in the world to make those authorizations? What countries are positioning themselves as experts to take power and control in that space? And the answer to that is Global North. Timing and sequencing, corresponding adjustments, transparency, pulling and viewing, and other real-world impacts on the ground. And I'm going to end here and say thank you all. And this is something that we really must address at this COP. Maybe this isn't a finance COP, but it's a fall solutions COP. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamra. Off to Amel. Yeah.
Thank you, Souparna. Hello, everyone. Talking about fall solution, as we all know, after the discussion since Glasgow have highlighted the need to phase out fossil fuel, especially addressing the reduction of unabated coal. This implies that while unabated coal is being targeted, abated coal can still operate with its emission. Then the question arises, how does unabated coal get reclassified as abated coal, suddenly becoming acceptable in terms of climate impact, with its emission overload and not subject to mitigation? As countries aim for net zero emission by 2050, several key targets have been set. There is no new coal plant should be approved after 2021, and rich nations are expected to phase out coal by 2030, and a global phase out coal and oil-fired plant is targeted for 2040. But however, in Indonesia, we are witnessing a shift where unabated coal is rebranded as abated coal through practicing of co-firing with biomass sourced from wood. This method is currently being applied in 52 coal-fired power plants in Indonesia, boosting a combined capacity of 18.1 gigawatts. But what are the consequences of this approach? One, there will be land use change for energy wood plantation, and it could affect up to 2.3 million hectares, which is nearly 50 times of London. And there is a risk of deforestation impacting at least 1 million hectares of tropical rainforest, which is home to diverse wildlife and vital resource for local communities, including food and water. Transforming forests into monoculture plantation result in the loss of vibrant biodiversity among both flora and fauna. This is along with the cultural heritage of indigenous communities in Indonesia that rely on this forest for their livelihood. This practice has the potential lead to carbon emission, so it's not carbon neutral, soaring as high as 26.48 million tons of carbon. It also extends the life of coal and coal-fired plants. Then this carbon emission persists both not only in the combustion but also from logging the forest. This so-called transformation into habitat coal merely serves as a disguise to clear tropical rainforests in Indonesia for energy wood plantation, converting primary tropical rainforests into monoculture plantation. And Indonesia is already exporting its wood pellet to South Korea and Japan. And also, there are forestry permits for corporations in Indonesia covering 30.5 million hectares of forest area. And there is only 6.6 million hectares of forest recognized for social forestry initiatives that benefit the communities. And furthermore, merely about 265 hectares forest area have been recognized for indigenous communities. So there is inequality to accessing the forest area. This forestry permit is held by large corporations like Sinarmas, Medco, and John Lynn Group, and others. The change in land use for energy plantation, the resulting of deforestation, not only threaten forests and biodiversity, but also have dire consequences for indigenous people, women, farmers, and local communities reliant on this land. In one of our province in Indonesia, South Papua, Merauke, the expansion of energy wood plantation has resulted in deforestation, which turn has contributed to malnutrition among children and pregnant women in the indigenous community. This situation raises serious human rights concern. So it is really important to clarify that biomass is not carbon neutral. Bioenergy that depends significantly on land use fail to effectively lower carbon emission, and it shouldn't be categorized as renewable energy. This represents a misleading solution to the challenge of reducing coal. For genuine climate action aimed at phasing out fossil fuel, we must prioritize the early retirement of coal-fired power plants rather than extending their operational lifespan with the fuel solution. This is essential. And also we need to protecting Indonesian tropical rainforests. This is crucial because these forests are essential for absorbing carbon. But their significance goes beyond that, because these forests provide home for countless people, serve as a vital source of wood and water. So burning forests for energy is not a solution we can afford. Thank you.
Thank you, Amalya. As you can listen to her, it's a story of unpacking the real character of when they say phasing out of fossil fuel or phasing down of coal, a new kind of terminology that we find since Glasgow COP. And so you can see how the false solutions are coming into the decision text of the COP. Every COP you find these lines are being repeated, and then it increases the list of false solutions that these decision texts actually, it's so abrasive that they are talking of still monoculture plantations, they are still talking of geoengineering, they are talking of carbon capture, they are talking of BECCS, bioenergy and carbon capture storage, they are talking of phase down of coal, but actually they are burning biomass, they are burning trees. And this is the reality of the entire false climate actions that we are seeing in front of us. So I think when we really ask that what is at stake at this COP or at COP29, we are actually, except what Tamra has echoed, it is become and it will become at the end a false solutions COP. So about 5 minutes, if there is anybody to, yes.
Can you stand up?
Thank you very much. It was very enlightening. I am Carlos Adrian Perez, Director for Latin America at Equal Right. And I have a question in regards to the intersection between protection of forests, biodiversity, environmental, and also peace building. Recently at COP16 in Cali, Colombia, we spoke about the narrative between peace and nature. And it's not just a political narrative, but a reality in Latin America. In Colombia, for example, one of the main reasons why there's a lot of problems within our forests is between social tensions and armed conflicts. And I believe that there's a quite close logic between how we face down fossil fuel extraction, how we actually fund communities directly, for example, through universal basic income with no conditions, and tackling both environmental degradation and armed conflict. I would love to hear your take on this. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just say a couple of things, and maybe we can speak also outside. I think definitely there are instances also in Colombia and studies that have shown how different armed gang groups are using carbon offsets as well. And so there is that linkage happening between carbon markets and narco trafficking and other examples of violence on the ground, and how they become connected in different types of globalized exchanges like these. There's so much money at stake. There's so much money at stake, and the communities are not the ones that receive that money. In fact, they're used as almost pawns in a wider system in order for certain types of powers to maintain those powers. And so we very much see, structures of powers replicating themselves and getting wealthy and rich and profiting off of these systems, and communities who are already fighting projects and difficulties on the ground ending up having to fight another layer of difficulty. And so there's definitely a link between violence and narco trafficking, war, and how carbon markets play out as well. And so I'll just leave it there, and we can speak more after.
One quick question. I work with indigenous communities in over 100 countries and currently in the Arctic. I had a related question, but I'll ask that outside. One question that I wanted to ask was, between the two COPs, there were about 50 countries going into elections. And some of the biggest carbon trading is happening with IT companies emerging with their data centers and AI. And some of them are also the biggest contributors to nonprofits in terms of funding. With the political climate and the funding climate so dependent on people who are in a way impacting carbon trading and otherwise, do you think your lobbying power is diminishing a little bit, or do you think you can go out on all fronts?
So I think I understood the question is around AI and carbon markets and the interlinkages between them.
Also contributors to funds to nonprofits. So I was just wondering whether, because there is a strong interlinkage between nonprofits getting their funds from some of these organizations, is it undermining their lobbying power as well, or do you think it's unaffected?
I think you are absolutely correct. it does. And we are seeing the kind of, this undermining the relationship between donors, funders, and what they are funding actually. Of course, that is quite, at some point of time, it will be a conflict of interest at that sense. And you're right, yes. Thank you for your joining us today in the press conference.